Well, good morning. It's another bright, sunshiny Sunday morning. It looks like it's going to be a beautiful day. So let's go to the Lord in prayer before we start our lesson today. Lord, help us to stay focused on what matters most. Help us love those that others reject. Help us to be willing to forgive. Help us to overcome selfishness and pride. And help us to have the heart of a servant, because that's what you said. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so we're looking at the endurance of love. You know, last week we started on that, and we looked at some matters about how love, we've looked at this whole series, and we started off with the fact that, well, Jesus made it very, very clear that love is the priority. We sometimes say, well, it's the first. Well, it's not first in the sense of a long list of things. It's first in the sense that that has to be in place in order for all of the other attributes of a disciple to be in place. That it can't be without that. So love endures and embraces the shameful. In other words, what are the attributes of how we act out love in our lives? That it becomes an action verb. And we talk a lot about that in our lessons, that Jesus used action verbs over and over again because he expects us to do something with what we have received from him. And so one of the attributes is for the shameful. If we go to Luke, the 7th chapter, and starting with the 36th verse. Because remember, one of the purposes of Jesus' ministry on earth was to show us, well, this is how you can live consistent with God's will. In other words, how to be righteous. Remember, we've talked about that before, that righteous just means operating within the will of God, doing the will of God. And so if we look at Luke 7, starting with verse number 36, and it says, "And then one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil, and stood at his feet and behind him weeping. And she began to wash his feet with her tears and wipe them with her hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with fragrant oil. Now, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, This man, if he was a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman it is that is touching him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Simon, I have something to say to you. So he said, Teacher, say it. He says, There is a certain creditor who had two debtors. And Jesus goes on to tell this parable, about forgiving debt, but not passing that on to others and what that means. So you see, the Pharisee had not yet comprehended that what God intended for his love to be shared for others, that, well, maybe the people that need it the most are those that are the furthest away from God, rather than those that think they're the closest to God. And that anytime one of those people comes and asks, and she was obviously showing the fact that she was worshiping Jesus, that an act of love is to receive that lost person in order to redeem them, in order to bring them back into the fold, because that is the ultimate goal of the love of God for all of us. And all is that big, big word. So love is willing to forgive. Willing to forgive, no matter what the circumstances might have been, in order for there to be a better tomorrow. We talk about this, that our conversion is that we're dead to the old life and born into a new life. Well, that's forgiveness. Well, we need to practice that as well. So it endures the selfish and prideful. The disciples wanted to be followers of Jesus, but as we have looked at and will continue to look at, they were having a hard time also comprehending exactly what this love of Jesus was talking about played out. So it's not just the Pharisees that were having a hard time comprehending what Jesus was trying to say and to show to them. And so if we go to Mark, the 10th chapter, and we see that very clear and famous episode that shows how the disciples were looking for something that was not what Jesus was trying to show to them. So if we go to Mark, the 10th chapter, starting with the 35th verse, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him saying, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." Now that's an interesting statement, isn't it? What is behind that statement? What's implied by that particular statement? That we want you to do whatever we ask. Well, what's implied by that is we want to be privileged. Okay? We want to be privileged. See, they lived in a world where a very, very small percentage of people were privileged because they were Roman citizens and they had it all. And most all the people, some people estimate that the Roman citizenship maybe was no more than 2 or 3% of the total population of the Mediterranean world. So the other 97, 98% were always struggling. We're always struggling. So being on the privileged side was, something which in the human sense was very desirable to put forward. But Jesus goes on to tell them, well, you don't really know what that means. So let's pick it up in the 36th verse. And he, Jesus, said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us that we may sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." Okay, so what's the privilege they want? In their world, whoever sat to the right of the leader was the next in command. Whoever sat to the left was the next in command. In other words, these were the privileged positions. They had privileged power. So they were seeking that. They were seeking that power. And Jesus said to them, "You do not know for what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And they said to him, "We are able." They're still thinking in the sense of privilege. And so Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand and at my left hand is not mine to give." Okay, so Jesus is warning them, he's pointing out to them that the purpose of the kingdom that he has come to set up is not one to have power and authority and lord it over others, but rather to be the servant that shows God love to the others. So, if our goal is privilege, no matter what it is that we're doing here, if our goal is privilege, then you see it's not of Jesus. Because Jesus didn't say that that's what we would have. He said we would be the servant of all. And so devotion to Jesus should not be to seek privilege. We see that in this story with the disciples. And so this comes in and it manifests itself in a lot of ways. So are there some people, when you seek out a church to go to, do you seek a church that will suit your needs? Or do you seek a church where through that church you can meet the need of Jesus in this world? Because the first one you see is really, if you think about it, is a matter of privilege. I want to come to this church because it will provide me with all of these things that I want. You could fill in the blank as to what things churches provide or could provide to the membership. Or is this a place that we come in order to be equipped to go out and to live and show the love of Jesus? And so is the church one that's an equipper of what we're doing? Because as Paul pointed out in Romans, we're all equally servants of Christ. And so we need to remember that word servant. Servant is not a privileged position within the human hierarchy of society. So love endures. Love endures pain and betrayal. We see that. We've talked about that just a few weeks ago in the Easter season in terms of how Jesus continued to love his disciples and all of those around him, even all the way to the cross, where he was virtually abandoned. According to the Gospel of John, John was the only disciple at the cross. The rest of them had gone off to hide somewhere. And so we look at betrayal. We often talk about Jesus as betrayal, but if you think about it carefully, most of the people that were closest to Jesus betrayed him at the end, prior going up to the cross. And then there's lots of ways that we can show pain or cause pain. One of them is by causing hurt by commission. Let's go to Peter, 1 Peter, because Peter talks about this. 1 Peter, the 2nd chapter, starting with the 20th verse. And he says, "For what credit is it when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently, but when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously." So it's this commission, hurt and commission. Jesus forgave those who were punishing, hurting, ridiculing, shaming him. And then we have the pain that can come from omission. Okay, so the first one was, what is it we do? The second one is, well, can we cause pain by failing to do? And let's go back to Mark. Mark's gospel talks about this as well. Go to the 14th chapter of Mark, and we'll start reading with the 32nd verse. Then he came to a place which was called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took Peter and James and John with him, and he began to be troubled and deeply distressed. And he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch." And he went a little farther, and he fell on the ground, and he prayed if it were possible the hour be from him. And we know the rest of this story. The disciples fell asleep. And he came back and he woke them up and he said, "Okay, pray with me some more." So their omission was the failure to pay attention, to meet the need that Jesus had right there. And that caused Jesus some concern. The third way is through incomprehension. Causing pain without even realizing it, because we hadn't really paid any attention to what was going on. And so let's look in Luke, the 23rd chapter, starting with the 22nd verse. No, I'm sorry, the 32nd verse. There were also 2 other criminals led with him to be put to death. And when they had come to the place called Calvary, where they crucified him, and the criminals were on the right hand and on the other on the left, then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." That they didn't comprehend what they were doing. Jesus says they don't realize. They haven't thought about this. They haven't pondered this, if we use that expression when we looked at the life of Mary. They haven't pondered this to understand what's truly going on. So our goal should be to lead others to Jesus. And in order to lead others to Jesus, we have to show the love of Jesus to them in an enduring manner, no matter what the issues are, no matter what the pushback might be, no matter whether it's ridicule or embarrassment, or maybe it causes us to have to go out of our way to put our priority second in order to reach out to this person. But that is the example of the enduring nature of the love of Jesus in our lives. And so we endure in order to grow in Christ. So, brothers and sisters, I hope you have a great and safe week. Next week we'll look a little bit more at what this priority of love in the life of a disciple means in terms to live out the disciple. Have a great week.